Hi, Elaine here. Today I'll share how to create a customizable leather look cover for your digital planner. We'll be using a free stock image and several features of Affinity Publisher. Keep watching until the end, and there's a bonus section where we'll add a clasp and stitching. This video is in response to an inquiry from a viewer who wanted to be able to add different coloured covers to their digital planners. So here you go. First of all, I'll create a new file. Now obviously that's not a necessity. If you already have a file and you want to add a cover to it, skip this step and follow along with the rest. But for me, I'm going to File and New. I'm going to make it A4 and I'm going to make it with 8 pages. I'll use these colour settings. I will put a margin in it, although for this demonstration it won't be needed. And I'm not adding a bleed to it because I'm not sending it to print. The final planner will be a PDF. And click Create. Automatically we're taken to page 1, and the first thing I need to do is to add a picture placeholder. So moving across to the tools, clicking on the picture frame tool and adding that full page to page 1. Next thing I need to do is to get to the stock panel. Now I have my stock panel showing. If you don't, you will need to go to Window and down to Stock and make sure there is a tick next to it. And what I'm looking for is a leather texture. There's a few options, trial and error, and I found that this one is reasonable. So dragging and dropping that into the picture frame. I've included the link below in case you don't want to use the stock panel. One thing that struck me as I looked at that, I know this is going to sound bizarre because it's a texture, it looks upside down to me. So first thing I'm going to do is flip it with the flip vertical button. And that looks much better. Now looking at the layers panel, what we have is the picture frame, and within the picture frame we have the image. Now the name isn't helpful, so I'm going to change the name of that to leather. If you're happy with the colour, then you can leave it alone. If you want to have the ability to change the colour, you can do that easily by adding an effect. Now the effect in question is the colour overlay. So putting a tick next to the box to apply it, by default that's going to be black. And the blend mode is set to normal with an opacity of 100%. So first thing, you could change the opacity. With black it's not a good look. So I'm going to start by changing the colour in here. Now with the blend mode set to normal, it's a solid colour block. But we have many blend modes. I'm going to use the colour blend mode, but depending on what colour you actually want, you could use some of the other blend modes. Trial and error, look through them, see what suits your purpose. Now, the benefit of doing it with an effect is I can go into here and I can change the colour, and that will change the overlay. But this isn't the best way to do it. So leaving that where it is, what I'm going to do is go and create a global colour. So up to my swatches panel, and from the burger menu, add global colour. That does two things. First of all, it enables me to add a global colour with this global colour dialog box. It will also create a document palette because I don't already have one. So where it says global colour 1, I'm going to change that to planner cover and choose a colour for it. So let's go for a bluish colour first. And adding that. Now what will happen in the swatches panel is it will change to the document palette and it will have our colour in it. I'm not doing anything with it from there. I'm going back to my layer effects, and where we have the colour, I'm going to click that and access the global colour from within here. Now you could be forgiven for thinking, well, it's just not an option. But there is a drop down at the top here and you can choose your swatches. So you have all these options. Swatches will show you all the colour swatches you have on your system or within Affinity Publisher. But this isn't the document palette. We've seen swatches at the top, but there's also another way to pick down here. And what this does is limit it to the palettes. And there is my document palette. There is my planner cover. So as I apply that, you can see it change in here. I don't want to make any other changes to it in here. The whole point of this is, if I want to change the colour of the planner cover, instead of doing it in the dialog box, I can do it in the swatches by right-clicking and saying Edit Fill. A quirk of Affinity Publisher is, whereas before we had sliders in here, it defaults to the last view that was used. So we're seeing the swatches and we're seeing the document palette. If I go back up here and I go to the hex sliders option, I have access to the actual sliders that will change the colour. So if I move these, you'll see what will happen. Now another thing I can do in here is, instead of just using the hex sliders, I can access the other options we've got, and one of those is lightness, which means I can reduce the impact of the colour. So taking that all the way down, it's virtually black and white. So I do want some colour, but I don't want it to be overbearing. So I'll set it about there. And that's it. We have our leather effect planner cover and the ability to change the colour of it. But as covers go, it's not very exciting. So to add a little bit more realism to it, what I'm going to do is add a clasp to the cover. So using the rounded rectangle tool, I will put on there a shape that's about the right size for the wrap that comes round, and I'll need to do quite a lot with it to make it work. But before we go any further with it, I will zoom in. The rounded rectangle tool has a smart handle, which is the red dot that we can see in the top left corner. Moving that changes all four corners. You may also like to know that if you double click on that dot, it will take you back to how you had it set originally. I need here to have square corners on the right hand side. Obviously changing all of them isn't going to do that for me. But this is because this shape has what's called a single radius. And if I take the tick out of single radius, I now have 4 edit points, each one behaving independently. So I can pull those out and have square corners on the right hand side. I know coming up I'm going to need another shape that's virtually identical to this one. So I'm going to use Command and J to get a copy of it and then toggle off the view of it. Going back to my original one here, the wrap would look very similar. It would be of the same material. So going down to my leather image, the actual image itself, and duplicating that with Command and J, means that I can drag that up to the rounded rectangle and drop it inside it. It doesn't look like it's done anything, but it has. If I toggle off the background, you can actually see that I've got the same image, but constrained to the rounded rectangle shape. Obviously, I need it to stand out more. A couple of things I can do with that. I can actually click on the image, and you can just see the image selected. It's got the blue border on it. And if I grab that and move, you can see what I'm moving is the actual texture. So one thing I can do is make sure that it doesn't look too similar by moving it. So I'll just randomly move it a bit. Still not standing out greatly. So what I'll do with that is the rounded rectangle itself, I will apply some effects to it. The most obvious thing to do to give it some depth is to add an outer shadow. And quite a big outer shadow, like that. And offset it as required. Just play around with that and get it to look like you want it to look. Next thing I need on this is a snap, and that's a little button that closes that wrap. And I'll also start naming these layers. I'll keep the snap separate for the moment. Now you may be thinking the snap is usually round. So what I could use is the ellipse tool. But to give me more flexibility, I'm going to use another rounded rectangle. Now you may be wondering that doesn't look like a rounded rectangle. The thing with Affinity Publisher is each tool remembers the last settings that were used, and those were the last settings that were used. And I have 4 edit points, 4 red handles. In this circumstance, I only want a single radius, so put the tick in the box and make it look circular. And scale as required. I'm holding down the Shift key to make sure that it is proportional, and finally putting it into place. You can see the red line which is showing me the snap, and that's because I have snap turned on in the toolbar. What I need to do with this first is give it a colour, and to make this as flexible as possible, I'll make sure that's another global colour. So just click add a global colour, then go in and edit the fill. Again, it defaults to the previous view, and in this case I want the sliders, so I can make it quite dark. Don't particularly want it completely black, but certainly a dark colour. And that doesn't look too bad. Next thing I need to do is to rename that. and finally select the shape and apply that colour to it. That looks far too flat, so I'll add some effects to it, starting with the 3D effect. Now I'm going to increase the radius from the default of 5 to 10, and I'm going to change the direction of that. So moving that round to the left hand side, you can see the highlight is then on the left of the shape. I'm also going to add a bevel and emboss to that. The type is set to pillow, and I can make that bigger if I want. So let's see what that looks like at 10. Not bad at all. So I've added some depth to it. If you want to take that a step further, you can do that by adding a shape, and that shape is the crescent tool. I'll draw out a crescent here. Now obviously having it the same colour isn't going to give us the effect that we need. So I'll just apply a white fill to that and get it in the right place first. So moving it across to here, size-wise that's virtually what I need. I might stretch it slightly and make sure it's in the right place. But the light's coming in from the top left, so I'm going to rotate that by 45 degrees. And then use a different tool to get it to blend in better, and that tool is the transparency tool. Clicking that, moving across to the shape, and pulling down from the top edge towards the bottom. You can pull that as far as you want depending on the effect that you want. So I'll pull it down there. Let's click away and see how that looks. And that looks pretty good. Now at that point, I'm going to tidy this up a bit. This is the background of the snap. That's the crescent, which is the highlight. I'll group the two of those and name that as the snap. The snap and the wrap together make the clasp. So I'll group that and name it. Now you may remember, if you are following along here, that I said we would need this shape, this rounded rectangle, so let's turn that back on. What I'm going to do with this is make it a little bit smaller, but it's already the perfect shape in the perfect place, so I do just need to change the scale of it. And what I then need to do is make it look like stitching. So to do that, I'm going to take away the fill, but I will add a stroke to it. Now normally you apply a solid line style and scale that so it's the correct size. That is not a good look for what we want. But you do have a second option, which is the dash line style. So clicking on that, it's starting to look a little bit better, but it doesn't actually look like stitching. It's far too close. But down the bottom, once you have applied that, you get to change the size of the dashes and the size of the gaps. The dashes are indicated with a solid block at the bottom, and the gaps are indicated with an empty shape at the bottom. And I happen to know that putting in 2 for the size and 2.5 for the gap gives me pretty much what I'm looking for here. Now I still have a problem, and that problem is on the right hand edge I can see the stitching, and it wouldn't look like that where you can see it. So I'm just going to stretch it out a little bit and make sure that that disappears. So far, so good. But it still looks as though it's hovering over the leather, and we need it to look like it's part of it. So making sure it's selected, I will add some effects to that. Moving that so we can see it. Again, I'm going to give it a 3D look, and I'm also going to add the bevel and emboss. So it's set to pillow at 5, and that is looking good. To be flexible in the future, one thing you might want to do is to add a global colour and use that global colour for the stitching. So again, I'm going to add a global colour, right click that and rename it. This time it's the colour for the stitching. At the moment it's set to black, but I can edit that fill. And while it doesn't look like anything has changed, that's because I haven't actually applied that colour yet. So with it selected, I will apply the global colour and then go back into the global colour and make that something more complementary to the colour that we've got. So not particularly purple, that's not the best of looks, is it? More blue, like that. One more thing to do. So Command and 0 to zoom out and have a look at it. Looking at that, I can see that that snap is a little bit big. So I'll select the snap, scale it down and reposition it. Now the clasp here doesn't include the stitching at the moment. So best practice, name your layers and put your layers inside the correct group. Okay, the one more thing to do is if you've got stitching on the clasp, you may well want stitching around the entire cover. So going back and getting a rounded rectangle and drawing that on, and you can see what has happened is, again, it remembers the last settings used, and the last settings used actually just happen to be the same as the stitching in the clasp. But the colour doesn't look correct, so we'll get it looking like we want it to look in terms of the size. And then I'm going to zoom in and we can see what's wrong with it. And what is wrong with it, although it has the correct colour applied to it, it has none of the effects. Now we could go through and apply the effects again manually, or faster way to work, we can go into the stitching in here which has the effects, copy, so edit copy or Command and C, and then making sure we've got the other stitching, the cover stitching selected, click on edit and paste style, and that is a much faster way to work. Again, good practice. Let's name these and let's put them where they need to be, which is inside the planner cover, and check the overall finished result. Oh, I lied. There's another thing. As we're looking at that, it doesn't look too bad, but if the stitching has rounded corners on the cover of the planner, it would make sense that the planner had rounded corners, and we can do all of that as well. Just to make it easier, what I'm going to do is select everything we've got and lock it, because I'm going to add another rounded rectangle, which is the full size at the moment. The style of this doesn't apply, but I will zoom in so we can see exactly what I'm doing with it, which is I'm going to take it up there so we've got rounded corners. It doesn't need a stroke at all. I'll make that solid so you can see where it is, but we don't need the stroke at all. We just need the rounded rectangle. So it has no fill and no stroke. And what I'm going to do with that is move that down here to just above the planner cover. And so we know what I'm doing, it's going to act as a mask, and I'm moving the entire planner cover inside that mask. And what happens is it takes the corners away, it's masked the corners. Command and 0, and there is the finished result. So, a quick recap. I used a picture frame to act as a placeholder for a free stock image from the stock panel. I then edited a rounded rectangle shape to create the leather wrap. I added a snap to it with various effects, then created the stitching for the clasp, added complementary stitching to the actual cover, and finally masked the entire cover to give us rounded corners. If you want new tutorials and tips and tricks on a regular basis, check out my free training at elainegiles.com/VIP. Hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss future tutorials. And if you have any requests for specific tutorials, be sure to contact me. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.